Have you ever woken up from a dream so vivid, so utterly real, that for a moment you questioned whether you were truly awake? My name is Marcus Haven, a marine archaeologist who spent years exploring the deepest, darkest corners of the ocean. I've seen things that would make most people's skin crawl: wrecks left forgotten by time, ships consumed by the abyss, whispers of sailors lost to the sea. But none of that prepared me for what I'm about to share with you. It started with a dream so unsettling, so suffocating, that even now I can't shake the feeling that it wasn't just my mind playing tricks. No. This dream felt like something reaching out, something ancient and malevolent, lurking just beneath the surface of reality, waiting to pull me under. Before we dive into this story, you need to understand one thing: not all nightmares end when you wake up. Some cling to you, burrow into your soul, and follow you into the daylight. If you're brave enough to continue, if you dare to explore the thin line between dreams and something far more sinister, then subscribe to this channel. Trust me, you'll want to stay close as we venture into the unknown, because what I'm about to tell you may change the way you look at your own dreams forever. And don't forget to hit that like button, because every story I share here is not just for the curious, but for those willing to confront the darkness lurking in the corners of their own minds. This isn't just a story. It's a warning. It started on a night that felt no different from any other. I had gone to bed after a long day of research, but as soon as I closed my eyes, I was somewhere else. The air was thick with an oppressive fog, clinging to my skin like icy fingers. I found myself standing on the deck of an ancient ship, its hull creaking under the weight of years lost to time. The sails, once proud and white, were now tattered and gray, flapping lifelessly in a wind I couldn't feel. The ship swayed gently, but the water below was eerily calm, a vast black mirror stretching into an endless void. I could smell the salt in the air, but it was tainted, corrupted by the sickly stench of rot, like something long dead was hidden beneath the surface. As I took my first hesitant step, the wooden planks groaned underfoot, the sound echoing into the silence. And then I heard it, a distant sound like a low, mournful wail carried by the fog. It was faint, barely audible, but it sent a chill down my spine. My eyes darted around, trying to find the source, but the fog was thick, and the shadows seemed to move on their own. The further I walked, the more the déjà vu crept in. I had never been here before, but the sense of familiarity was overwhelming, as if this ship, this exact moment, had existed somewhere in the deep recesses of my mind. The smell of wet wood and decay filled my lungs, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was watching me. Each step forward felt like an act of defiance, as though the ship itself didn't want me there. The floorboards shifted underfoot, soft and swollen with dampness, like walking on the remains of something long dead. The fog curled around my legs, dragging, pulling, whispering. And then I saw it, out of the corner of my eye, a flicker of movement. I turned quickly, but there was nothing. Only shadows. Only fog. The distant wail came again, louder this time, and the sensation of being watched intensified, almost crushing. My heart pounded in my chest, and the silence that followed was deafening. I couldn't escape the feeling that this was more than just a dream. This was something ancient, something waiting, and I had just stepped into its domain. As I ventured deeper into the ship, the sense of dread thickened, clinging to me like the mist that wrapped around the decrepit vessel. The fog seemed to part just enough to reveal fragments of the ship's interior, a darkened corridor, flickering lanterns casting trembling shadows on the cracked wooden walls. But something wasn't right. As I walked, I noticed objects, small, insignificant things at first, shifting positions when I wasn't looking. A weathered compass on a table that I could have sworn faced north now pointed elsewhere. A frayed rope that had been coiled neatly when I passed it moments ago now lay strewn across the deck as if it had been dragged. The air grew colder, biting into my skin, and with every breath, the dampness seemed to fill my lungs like an unseen weight pressing down. Then came the shadows, long twisting shapes that danced along the walls, though there was no flame or light to cast them. They moved unnaturally, flickering in and out of existence, as if they had lives of their own. Every time I tried to catch a glimpse of them directly, they slipped away, retreating into the corners of my vision. The sensation of being watched grew unbearable, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end as if an unseen gaze was fixed upon me, following my every movement. I tried to convince myself it was just the dream playing tricks on me, but deep down, I knew better. This wasn't just fear. This was something far worse, a presence cold and calculating, lurking just beyond the fog. Suddenly, I saw something out of the ordinary, something that shouldn't have been there. A figure, faint and translucent, standing at the far end of the deck. Its form was barely distinguishable through the mist, but it was unmistakably human, dressed in tattered clothing that hung loosely on its frame. My heart hammered in my chest as I watched, frozen, unable to look away. The figure didn't move, but the shadows around it seemed to shift and writhe, bending toward it like they were drawn to its presence. Then, as if in slow motion, the figure lifted its head, and though I couldn't see its face clearly, I could feel its eyes, empty, hollow, and filled with a darkness that chilled me to the bone. I wanted to run, but my feet were rooted to the deck, heavy as lead. Just then, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a door, slightly ajar, a faint sliver of light spilling from the gap. It hadn't been there before. My pulse quickened, the instinct to flee clashing with an overwhelming curiosity that compelled me to move toward the door. The figure had vanished, swallowed by the fog, but its presence lingered in the air, thick and oppressive. With trembling hands, I reached for the door, the old wood cold beneath my fingertips. As I pushed it open, the light grew stronger, but what lay beyond was nothing I could have prepared for. Inside, the room was dimly lit by a single lantern, flickering with a weak, sputtering flame. The walls were lined with ancient nautical charts and rusted instruments, relics of the ship's forgotten past. But at the center of the room stood something far more unsettling, a table, covered in scattered papers, old maps, and what appeared to be a journal, open to a page filled with incomprehensible symbols. But that wasn't what sent a jolt of terror through me. No, it was the object resting on the journal, a compass identical to the one I had seen shifting earlier, now spinning wildly, its needle pointing in every direction, as if desperately searching for something, or someone. In the dim light of that eerie room, my breath caught in my throat as I stared at the compass spinning uncontrollably on the table. The frantic motion of its needle was hypnotic, almost as if it was searching for something beyond this world. The atmosphere was thick with an oppressive energy, a suffocating weight that made the air feel heavy in my lungs. My fingers trembled as I reached toward the compass, but just before I could touch it, the room plunged into darkness. The lantern flickered once, twice, and then its flame died out, leaving me in pitch black. Suddenly, a low guttural sound reverberated through the room, a noise that sent a spike of fear straight into my core. It was as though the ship itself had come to life, groaning and creaking in protest. The walls seemed to shift, closing in on me as the temperature plummeted, and a biting chill seeped into my bones. Then from the shadows, I saw it, something far more horrifying than I could have ever imagined. A figure slowly emerged from the darkness, its outline barely visible at first, but as it came closer, its grotesque form became all too real. Standing before me was the captain, or at least, what remained of him. His tattered uniform clung to a decaying body, his skin a pale, translucent gray, stretched taut over hollow bones. His eyes, or rather the empty sockets where his eyes should have been, stared straight through me, as if seeing not just my physical form but my very soul. Black, inky voids swirled where his pupils once were, absorbing all the light, all the warmth from the room. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My voice had been stolen by the overwhelming terror that gripped me. My heart pounded wildly in my chest, the beat of it echoing in my ears like the relentless crash of waves against the hull of a doomed ship. The captain's presence was suffocating, a manifestation of death itself. As he took a step toward me, the floor beneath him groaned in agony, and with each step, the room seemed to decay around us, wood rotting, metal rusting, the stench of salt water and decay becoming unbearable. I stumbled backward, my body moving on pure instinct as I tried to escape, but there was nowhere to run. The walls were closing in, the shadows thickening, and the captain's outstretched hand was reaching for me, fingers gnarled and dripping with black, oily substance that seemed to writhe like living shadows. In my desperation, I squeezed my eyes shut, hoping that when I opened them, I'd wake up in my bed, drenched in sweat but safe. But when I opened my eyes, I was still there, trapped in this nightmare that felt all too real. And then it happened. The captain's hand brushed my arm, cold as ice, and in that instant, a surge of paralyzing terror shot through me. My vision blurred, my mind spinning, and I felt myself slipping away, as if his touch had the power to pull me into the same void that had consumed him. The room seemed to twist and warp, reality bending under the weight of this entity's malevolence. Just when I thought it was over, the captain's grip tightened, and he whispered something, his voice a raspy guttural hiss that chilled me to the core. The words were incomprehensible, but they carried a weight, an ancient malice that sent shivers down my spine. I could feel my consciousness fading, my body growing weaker with every second that passed, as if he was draining the life from me. But then, in one final act of desperation, I forced my eyes closed once more, praying that this nightmare would release me. When I opened them again, I was back in my room, gasping for breath. My body was drenched in cold sweat, and my heart raced as if I had just escaped death itself. But something was wrong. My arm, where the captain had touched me, still felt cold, numb, like his grip had left a permanent mark. I wanted to believe it was just a nightmare, that it wasn't real. But as I looked down, my heart sank. There, etched into my skin, was the very symbol I had seen on the compass and in the captain's journal, dark and foreboding. I wasn't alone anymore. Something had followed me back. Something was still watching. The morning after the dream, I tried to shake off the lingering unease, but it clung to me like a dark cloud, casting shadows over everything I did. My arm still tingled with the cold numbness where the captain had touched me, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't rid my mind of that symbol. It was burned into my memory, just as it had been etched into my skin. I told myself it was just a dream, a figment of my imagination, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. Something had changed. Curiosity and fear gnawed at me relentlessly, so I did the only thing I could think of. I began to search. My background as a marine archaeologist gave me access to certain resources, archives of shipwrecks and maritime legends, but nothing prepared me for what I was about to uncover. I spent hours combing through ancient maps, nautical logs, and old sailors' journals, my fingers trembling as I sifted through the dusty pages. And then, buried deep in the archives, I found it, a mention of a ship, long lost to the sea, that sent a shiver down my spine. The ship was called the Lost Soul, a ghost ship that had been rumored to haunt the open seas for centuries. According to the legends, it was a cursed vessel, forever doomed to sail in a veil of mist, carrying the souls of its damned crew. Sailors whispered about seeing the ship emerge from the fog, only to disappear without a trace, leaving nothing but eerie silence in its wake. Every sailor who claimed to have seen it described the same thing: a ship with torn sails, rotting wood, and a captain with hollow eyes. My blood ran cold. The details of the legend were identical to my dream. It didn't stop there. I dug deeper, finding old news clippings and forgotten stories about the lost soul. The more I read, the more terrified I became. There were accounts of strange occurrences, disappearances, ships going off course, sailors losing their minds after claiming to see the cursed vessel. One report mentioned a man, a ship captain, who had gone mad after an encounter with the lost soul. He spoke of nightmares that bled into reality, of a cold presence that followed him even after he had escaped the ship. He had been found dead in his cabin, the same symbol I now bore carved into the wood beside his body. The weight of my discovery pressed down on me, suffocating. My dream had not been just a nightmare. It was connected to something far darker, something that had haunted the seas for centuries. The symbol, the cold touch of the captain, the relentless feeling of being watched, it was all real. And it wasn't over. Determined to learn more, I began reaching out to the locals in the area where the ship was last sighted. Their responses were chilling. Some refused to speak of it, crossing themselves and muttering about curses and bad omens. Others shared whispers of strange fogs that rolled in from the ocean without warning, thick and impenetrable, swallowing everything in its path. One elderly fisherman told me a story that sent shivers down my spine. He had once known a man who went missing after sailing through the fog. His ship had returned, but the man was never found. The only thing left on board was a journal, its pages filled with ramblings about a ship of lost souls and a captain with eyes as black as night. My heart raced as I listened, the dread deepening with every word. I wasn't just reading about an old legend, I was living it. The dream had been a warning, a prelude to something far more sinister. The lost soul was real, and it was still out there waiting. And now, it had found me. But what did it want? Why had it chosen me? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that the ship wasn't just a relic of the past. It was a trap, pulling those who encountered it into a nightmare they could never escape. That night, as I lay in bed, the same oppressive fog seemed to fill my mind. I could feel the weight of unseen eyes watching me, the shadows in my room shifting in ways they shouldn't. Sleep eluded me as the cold numbness spread from my arm to the rest of my body. I knew then that the nightmare had only just begun. The ship wasn't just haunting the ocean, it was haunting me. And the symbol on my arm was a mark, a connection between me and the cursed souls lost to the depths. The question wasn't whether the dream would return. The question was what would happen when it did. As days turned into weeks, the dream's grip on me tightened. It wasn't just something that haunted me at night, it was creeping into every waking moment. The symbol burned into my skin had not faded. If anything, it grew darker, colder, like a shadow that refused to leave. My obsession with the lost soul consumed me. Every spare moment was spent poring over old maps, nautical charts, and forgotten legends. But the more I searched, the more I realized something terrifying. The lost soul was never meant to be found. It existed outside of time, a phantom ship sailing the edges of reality, luring those who dared to seek it into its cursed grasp. I knew I had to go back to where it all began, the place where the ship was last seen. The locals had warned me to stay away, but their fear only fueled my determination. I needed answers, and I needed to confront whatever it was that had marked me. With growing desperation, I packed my things and headed to the fog-shrouded coastline. As I stood at the edge of the water, staring out at the vast, dark ocean, a familiar chill crawled up my spine. The air felt wrong, thicker, heavier. It was the same oppressive atmosphere from my dream. The sea was unnaturally calm, the waves barely lapping at the shore. There was no wind, no sound except for the distant call of seabirds that seemed to be warning me away. As I waded into the water, I noticed something strange. There was no reflection in the waves. It was as if the sea itself had turned into an abyss, swallowing any trace of light. My heart pounded in my chest as I boarded the small boat I had rented, its wooden hull creaking eerily in the stillness. As I set out into the fog, it felt like I was crossing an invisible threshold, leaving the safety of the world I knew and entering something far more sinister. The fog thickened, swallowing the shoreline behind me until I could no longer see it. I was alone, surrounded by an endless void. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional groan of the boat as it cut through the water. My breath came in shallow gasps, the cold biting deeper into my skin with every passing moment. I tried to shake off the fear, but it clung to me like a second skin. I was heading into the unknown, chasing a ghost that had already marked me. Then through the thick fog I saw it, a shape rising from the mist, barely visible at first, but unmistakable. The lost soul. It was just as it had been in my dream. The ship loomed before me, its tattered sails flapping lifelessly in the still air, the wood rotting and weathered by centuries of salt and decay. The sight of it sent a jolt of terror through me, but I couldn't turn back. I had to know. I had to understand why it had chosen me. As I approached the ship, the temperature plummeted, and the sound of my own breath seemed to freeze in the air. I tied the boat to a crumbling pier and stepped onto the deck of the lost soul. The wood beneath my feet groaned, as though the ship itself was protesting my presence. Every step felt like an intrusion, as if I was walking into a graveyard where the dead had not yet found peace. The mist clung to the ship, swirling in unnatural patterns, like ghostly hands reaching out to pull me deeper into the heart of the vessel. That's when I heard a voice, a whisper faint and distant, carried on the cold wind. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but as I moved closer to the center of the ship, the whisper grew louder. It was coming from below deck. My heart raced as I descended the creaking stairs, the air growing heavier with every step. The darkness below was thick, almost tangible, and the lantern I carried did little to cut through the gloom. Then, I saw him. Eleanor Blake, the historian I had met during my research, was standing there, as if she had been waiting for me. Her eyes were wide, her face pale and drawn, and there was something about her presence that felt off, like she didn't quite belong in this world anymore. She told me that she had been investigating the lost soul for years, but she hadn't told me everything. She had seen the ship before. She had dreamed of it, just like I had. And like me, she had been marked. She showed me her arm, and there it was, the same symbol, dark and twisted, etched into her skin like a brand. Eleanor's voice trembled as she recounted her own nightmare, eerily similar to mine. She spoke of the same captain with hollow eyes, the same feeling of being watched. But what she said next sent a wave of dread crashing over me. She had been drawn to the ship, just like I had, and she had come back, just like I had. But every time she tried to escape, the ship would call her back, pulling her deeper into its curse. "We can't escape," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Once you're marked, you're part of it. Forever." The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I wasn't just investigating a mystery, I was part of it. The ship had claimed me, and there was no escape. Eleanor's eyes flickered with fear as she spoke, her words confirming what I had feared all along. The ship wasn't just a legend. It was a living nightmare, feeding on the souls of those who dared to seek it out. The shadows around us shifted, and I knew that something was coming. The captain, whatever he was, wasn't finished with us yet. I could feel his presence, lurking just beyond the edge of the darkness, waiting. The ship groaned beneath us, and the air turned colder, thick with the weight of impending doom. Eleanor's voice trembled as she whispered, "He's coming." And I knew, without a doubt, that we were not alone. The air inside the ship had become so thick, so heavy with dread, that it felt like I was breathing through water. Eleanor's last words hung in the air, "He's coming," and every instinct in my body screamed for me to run to get out. But there was nowhere to go. The ship, the lost soul, felt alive, like it was swallowing us whole, pulling us deeper into its cursed embrace. The shadows shifted around us, thickening, crawling like dark tendrils seeking to ensnare us. The cold was biting, more intense now, and I could feel it gnawing at my bones, as if something was draining the warmth, the life, from the very air we breathed. And then the whispering started again, low guttural voices that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. They grew louder, echoing through the ship, filling the space with an unnatural chorus of despair. The voices weren't human. They were something else, something ancient, twisted, as though they were the echoes of all the lost souls trapped aboard this cursed vessel. I glanced at Eleanor, her face pale, eyes wide with terror. She was shaking, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps, as if she could already feel what was coming. "It's too late," she whispered, her voice trembling. "We're already his." Suddenly, the ship creaked violently, a deep groaning sound that reverberated through the walls, and from the darkness he appeared. The captain. He stepped out from the shadows, his form more defined now than in the dream, more real, and far more terrifying. His decayed uniform clung to his skeletal frame, and his skin was a sickly grayish hue, stretched thin over bone. But it was his eyes, those hollow, empty voids, that paralyzed me with fear. They weren't just dark, they were endless, like staring into the abyss itself, and within them, I could see the reflection of every lost soul that had ever been claimed by this ship. The captain didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence alone was enough to suffocate us with terror. I could feel it, the weight of his gaze, the coldness that seemed to seep into my very soul, as if he was already reaching inside me, claiming me as his own. My heart pounded wildly, each beat louder in my ears than the last, but I couldn't move. I was frozen, trapped in the captain's gaze, as though he was draining the very essence of who I was. His hand, skeletal and grotesque, reached out, and I saw it, the same dark inky substance from the dream, dripping from his fingertips, writhing like shadows brought to life. And then I realized, the captain wasn't just after me. He wasn't after Eleanor, either. He was after something far more terrifying. The ship, the lost soul, was feeding on us, drawing us in, not just to claim our bodies, but to pull us into its very essence, to bind us to the ship itself. We weren't just passengers aboard this ghost ship, we were becoming part of it, part of its endless curse, doomed to sail the mist-shrouded seas for eternity. Every soul it claimed was trapped here, bound to the captain's will, and now it was our turn. In a moment of sheer terror, I turned to run, dragging Eleanor with me, but the ship seemed to shift around us, the corridors narrowing, closing in like a maze designed to keep us trapped. The wooden floorboards groaned beneath our feet, and the walls creaked as they seemed to bend and warp, contorting into unnatural shapes. We ran, the lantern's flickering light barely illuminating the twisted passageways ahead. But no matter how fast we moved, I could feel the captain's presence closing in, his footsteps slow but deliberate, echoing ominously in the dark. We stumbled into a small cabin at the heart of the ship, and there, on a rickety table covered in dust and decay, I saw it, a journal, ancient and weathered, its pages yellowed and brittle with age. My hands shook as I opened it, my heart racing as I read the words scrawled across the page. It was a captain's log, but not just any captain. It was his log, the captain of the lost soul. The journal recounted the ship's final voyage, the storm that had sealed its fate, and the curse that had doomed its crew to an eternity of suffering. But what sent a chill down my spine was the description of the curse itself. Those who seek the ship shall be claimed by it. The marked are bound to the sea, to the captain, to the endless fog. There is no escape. My eyes widened as I turned to Eleanor, the horror of what I had just read sinking in. We had been marked the moment we set foot on the ship, perhaps even before, from the moment we dreamed of it. The symbol on our arms was the mark of the curse, and there was no way out. The ship wasn't just a physical place, it was a trap, a prison for souls, and now it had claimed us. Just then, the captain appeared in the doorway, his hollow eyes fixed on us, and the temperature in the room plummeted. The shadows around him twisted and writhed, growing darker, more menacing. My body went cold, my mind reeling with the realization that there was only one way to end this. One final, impossible choice. The journal had mentioned it, a way to break the curse. But the price was unimaginable. One of us would have to stay behind, bound to the ship, while the other escaped. It was the only way to break the cycle. I looked at Eleanor, her face etched with terror, and I knew what I had to do. The captain stepped closer, his shadow stretching across the room, and I could feel the weight of his gaze as he waited for my decision. Time seemed to slow as I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my chest. There was no turning back now. The ship had claimed its victims, and the only question left was, who would stay and who would be free? As the captain's cold, skeletal hand reached for me, I made my choice. But as the darkness closed in, I couldn't help but wonder, was there truly any escape from the lost soul? Or had I only delayed the inevitable? When I opened my eyes, I was no longer aboard the lost soul. I was lying in a hospital bed, sterile lights glaring down at me, the sound of machines beeping steadily in the background. My body ached as though I had been dragged through the depths of the sea, my limbs heavy and cold. At first, there was a fleeting sense of relief. Had it all been just a nightmare? Had I escaped? But as I tried to sit up, the familiar weight of dread settled back into my chest. Something wasn't right. My mind raced, fragments of the dream, or was it reality? Flickering in my memory like a broken reel of film. The doctors told me I had been found unconscious near the coastline, no explanation for how I had gotten there. "You're lucky to be alive," they said, their voices distant, as if muffled by the fog that still seemed to cling to my mind. But I knew better. Luck had nothing to do with it. I glanced down at my arm, expecting to see the symbol still etched into my skin. For a moment, I thought it was gone. But then, in the harsh light of the hospital, I saw it, a faint outline, like a scar that refused to heal. The mark of the lost soul was still there, a constant reminder that I hadn't truly escaped. The days that followed blurred together, but the feeling of being watched never left me. Shadows seemed to move in the corners of my vision, and the chill that had settled into my bones since that night on the ship remained. I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was always just out of sight, lurking, waiting. The symbol on my arm would flare with cold whenever I passed by mirrors or looked out into the ocean. I could feel the captain's presence, distant but always there, like a predator circling its prey. I wasn't free. The ship, its curse, its captain, they were still with me. And then, the nightmares began again. I would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in cold sweat, my heart racing as though I had been running from something in my sleep. Each night, the dream was the same. I was back on the lost soul, the fog thick, the captain's hollow eyes staring into mine, his skeletal hand reaching for me. I would hear the whispering voices, feel the cold grip of death closing in around me, but just before I could be claimed again, I would wake. Yet each time, it felt harder to pull myself back to reality, as if the line between dream and waking life was blurring. I began researching more deeply into the ship's curse, desperate for answers, for any way to break free of its grasp. I scoured ancient texts, reached out to historians, and even consulted with those who claimed to have experience with the supernatural. But everything pointed to the same chilling conclusion: the lost soul never lets go. Once you are marked, you are bound to it, forever. The ship sails not just through the seas, but through the dreams and nightmares of those it claims, pulling them deeper into its cursed existence with every passing moment. One night, as I was sifting through old documents, I found something that sent a jolt of terror through me. An old journal entry, from a sailor who had disappeared nearly a century ago, described the same experiences I had: dreams, the mark, the feeling of being watched. His final entry, written in a shaky hand, ended with a cryptic message: the nightmare never ends. The ship waits, and when the fog comes, so does he. That was when I noticed something even more horrifying. The events the sailor described, his journey, his nightmares, were almost identical to mine, down to the smallest detail. It was as if I was reading a premonition of my own fate. The sailor had disappeared without a trace, and I knew deep down that unless I found a way to stop it, I would meet the same end. The lost soul wasn't done with me. It was only waiting, watching, biding its time until it could pull me back into its eternal curse. And then it happened. One night, as I stood by the window, staring out at the fog rolling in from the ocean, I saw it. Faint at first, barely visible through the mist, but unmistakable. The silhouette of a ship, its torn sails, its ghostly outline. The lost soul had returned. My heart raced, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The fog pressed up against the glass, tendrils creeping into the room, cold and suffocating. I could feel the presence of the captain closer now, as though he was standing just behind me, waiting for me to turn around. I wanted to run to escape, but I knew there was no use. The ship had found me, and the fog, thick and impenetrable, was creeping through the streets, as if the ship itself was pulling the world into its cursed grasp. I could hear the faint sound of the foghorn, the same mournful wail from my dream, echoing through the night. My time was running out. The mark on my arm burned cold, and in that moment, I realized what the sailor from the journal had meant. The ship wasn't just in my dreams, it was pulling me back, dragging me closer to the void. The nightmare wasn't over. It was only just beginning. So now, I ask you, was it all just a dream? Or have I become part of something much larger, much darker? And why does the symbol keep appearing, not just in my life, but in the lives of others, across centuries? Is there any escape from the lost soul, or are we all destined to become part of its endless journey? If you've experienced anything like this, if you've seen the fog, felt the cold, or dreamed of the ship, then I urge you to share your story. Maybe, just maybe, we can find a way out together. But hurry! The fog is coming, and when it does, the nightmare begins again. If you dare to face the unknown, subscribe, leave your theories in the comments, and share this video. Because sometimes, the most terrifying part isn't the dream, it's realizing that the nightmare is real.